the BigAl Podcast with your host, Al Bishop, unfiltered and uncut.
Cool, we got Chad SUPERMAN Hannekom in the studio. How's it going, bud?
Good, man. Thanks.
Cool,
Good
man.
to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, only a pleasure. Thanks for giving us some time, man. I just, you guys are recently back from the USA, man. Saw some rubbing shoulders with some big boys in the MMA game. Just talk us through what that was like, man.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. We had a just over 3-week trip. We went to Fort Lauderdale for just over 2 weeks, and we based ourselves at American Top Team to start off with. And coming from Fight Fit, having been at American Top Team for a week, we didn't feel that it was a great fit for us.
Yeah.
It was very much about the individual in it for himself, and understanding that MMA is an individual sport. It's very important to have that team dynamic, and it was quite cliquey.
Sure.
So we made a decision that we were going to take ourselves for the remaining time to Combat Club. And Combat Club is basically a division of Old Black Zillions.
Yeah, sure. That's
Yeah.
Henry Hooft has basically
Exactly,
left
yeah.
Spin and started his own thing.
Yeah, so Henry Hooft has gone to Combat Club, and Richard Kwan, our coach, Rich, got into contact with the guys on the first Friday that we were there at American Top Team, because we were kind of like at a point where like we can't actually do this anymore.
Sure.
We were at a stage where we said no, we can't actually go back to training. And for a guy like myself, Boyd, Martin, and Rich to say that we don't want to train is quite something. So we made a collective decision, and we gave the guys a call, and then it was weird. Like, Rich just spoke to them over lunch, and he's like, I've got these 3 guys from South Africa. They're 3 of the top guys in South Africa. We want to come train with you guys. Would you give us a shot? The guy was like, you kind of can't train with the pros. You might have to join a general class, and then when Henry is around, but let me give him a shot. Within 3 minutes, they called us back, and they're like, okay, cool. You guys can come train with the pros. We'll see you on Monday. So they obviously went on to Sherdog and just maybe did some research and saw.
Just check who you were.
Yeah, saw who was who. I'm sure they get a lot of those calls. So
Sure.
they got to do their background checks, and then we were at Combat Club for our remaining time, and it was amazing. From the time we got there, Henry met us at the door with open arms, and he was just took us under his wing. And that very first day, we had a good hard wrestling session, and that evening we did privates with Henry. Next day we had our sparring and another private, and it was great. It was great exposure for us.
Sure.
We learned a lot about ourselves and about South African MMA in general. I mean, we saw that we are there, and that we have the ability to compete at that level, which is a really good thing. Like, a lot of guys come back from overseas trips, and they're almost a bit overwhelmed, where there was no stage where any of us, having rubbed shoulders, sparred with many of the guys from UFC, Bellator, 1FC, never once were we overwhelmed or in a situation where we got off the mat and we're like, damn, that was just too hectic for us, you know. So that was really cool coming back. It gave us a new confidence.
Okay, so would you say in terms of fight IQ and fight acumen, your guys' levels was almost exactly the same as what you were encountering in the US?
I think so. Definitely. I think for a lot of it, I think we could even say that we at most parts surpassed some of them.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we went there and kicked guys' asses and came back here and we're like superheroes, but I'm saying that it was good, interesting matchups when we were there, like sparring. I mean, sparring is always the best gauge.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's basically the hypothetical fight situation. So we went there and we did really well. I mean, there was one stage where at American Top Team on the first day of sparring, there were guys who were literally, like, I'm not even lying, were literally walking off the mat because they refused to spar with Boyd. And these are guys that have been fighting in the UFC the last 2-3 weeks, and these are like well-known lightweights in the world, and they're just like, no, we're not sparring with you. So that's what I mean, like, it was kind of cliquey. But when we got to Combat Club, it was good. It was good hardcore training, very structured, more to what we were into, and the guys were a lot more accepting, willing to learn, willing to help you, willing to fail. They weren't so closed off.
Okay. And you also got to experience the UFC with Soulja Boy. You went on the last trip that he was with you guys. You went with him, and you were in the corner with him.
I did, yeah.
What was that whole experience like of the UFC, and if you compare it to the EFC?
EFC is a great production. They put on a great show. They've got some good fighters. There's some average fighters, and then there's the lower tier fighters.
Sure.
UFC is the UFC for a reason. It's the benchmark for a reason, and I'll be honest in saying it's a whole different beast.
Okay.
Not in terms of the level of fighters and the caliber of competition over there, because there were a lot of times when you're in the training environment there, and you're seeing like the top guys train, and like being there, and Damian Maia's there, and like a lot of big names are around, and you're seeing how these guys train and stuff. And it's not that they are so much better than us. They just understand their processes, they understand their needs, and it comes down to a mindset. I really believe it's the mindset of a lot of the guys over there. They know what their thing is.
Sure.
And they just back their thing. And just UFC in terms of a production is, I don't think anything is close to what those guys are doing. Maybe Bellator, they could be close to what's happening out there, but I mean UFC is just, it really is on another level. Sure. They like really look after their athletes, and not saying that EFC don't, but I mean these are international superstars that they're dealing with, so they have to be on their toes at all times. So if you want 3 pairs of jocks for the day of the fight, you can call them, and 5 minutes later they'll knock on your hotel door and you'll have extra jocks. If you need your ankle guards, if you need strapping, if you need to go buy groceries and get food, like literally anything you need, they'll sort out for you.
Okay.
So it's just, I think it's the little things that these guys do that make the big difference for them. The professionalism away from the production, like that week, the 2-week build-up of UFC compared to the week build-up of an EFC.
Sure.
That's the huge difference, I think.
Okay. And how was the experience for you? Obviously, you're a young guy coming up. You've got a lot of hype behind you. I'm sure in your mind the UFC must be an end goal. So how was that experience for you to be there, to see how everything operates, to see how big the stage is, what the crowds are like? Do you think maybe in your future that'll play a big role for you?
Yeah, definitely. The experience in terms of walking out there and being in that situation, it was really great for me to have that opportunity. Sure. I can see myself competing at that stage, and I don't want to set a limit or a date to that, but I definitely see myself being able to compete there. I think the pressure of the lights and the stage, I don't think it's much different from the pressure you experience in EFC. I mean, the hype surrounding an EFC fight compared to the hype surrounding a UFC fight is no different. I think it's just the way you approach it in terms of your preparation. I think the big difference comes in is being comfortable, being able to travel and fight. I think that's where the big difference will come in, and I think that's where you see even guys that are fighting in the EFC that are based abroad. That's the difference for them. They're getting to come here out of their comfort zones and cut the weight here. Sure. And be away from family and friends and not be in that comfort zone, and then they compete and they do well, and there's no excuses. They come here, they compete, they lose, they win, they learn, and they take that experience away with them. If you look at a guy like Danny Henry,
Sure.
He's the Danny Henry that we saw in the first fight, I think, when he fought Matt Bursky.
Yeah.
If we saw the Danny Henry then compared to the Danny Henry who just fought Eager now, it's a complete different fighter. And that's 4 or 5 fights down the line with basically, let's call it international exposure and international experience. So I think that is something that we as South African fighters need to get used to. And that's what we are pushing ourselves towards now at FFM and in our camp. That's what the guys are aiming for, because, I mean, it's not that EFC is far off as a production or as a promotion or as a level of competition. There are good fighters and you will fight very difficult fights, but it's being able to, before you get to that UFC stage, at least have 4 or 5 fights under the belt where you are fighting in a different country, when you're not surrounded by your usual comforts.
Sure.
I think that's what the difference is, and that's something that we've learned from seeing our guys go over there and compete at that level.
Okay, cool. And then just turning towards yourself, talk us through how you actually got into martial arts. I know you come from quite a high level wrestling background. So how did the whole MMA thing come about for you?
I actually don't come from a wrestling background at all.
Okay.
It was all just rugby. I was a rugby player from when I was 9 years old until about 21, and I was actually training for a sevens tournament. And
Okay, so you were supposed to go to the Commonwealth Games at some stage.
No, Commonwealth Games, that was supposed to be for Sambo.
Okay, for Sambo, sorry,
Yeah.
that's what I got mixed up with.
Yeah, so I was supposed to go, but that was already like 3 years into my career of MMA. I think that was 2014.
Okay.
It was the London Commonwealth Games that I was supposed to go to, but it was just a rugby background, and I was training for a sevens tournament, and I heard about Fight Fit in this kind of like hardcore gym where they do this hardcore conditioning, and I went online and I went and saw the head coach, Rich, and he spoke to me and he said, well, there's no better conditioning for an athlete of your type than wrestling. So he slowly lured me into wrestling classes, and then he's like, well, why don't you start some boxing too while you're at it? And then next thing I was doing wrestling and boxing, and then he's like, you may as well do jiu-jitsu now. So 5-6 months down the line, I'm doing boxing, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu. And by the end of 2011, start of 2012, I just came to him and I was like, well, this is going to be my last year of rugby. My mind's made up. No matter what happens with this rugby now, I want to fight. So 2012 was kind of like my grooming year. I trained basically 18 months before I even considered, or before Rich considered letting me have an amateur fight. And then I had my first amateur fight in February 2013, and then the next fight was like a couple weeks later, and then a couple weeks later. But back then, the amateur scene wasn't as built up as what it is now.
Sure.
I mean, Fight Stars was basically only at the end of my amateur career.
Okay.
So it was kind of like on a Wednesday, Rich would call me and be like, hey, we're going to Nullspruit and you're fighting in 2 days' time. I'm like, oh, cool. Well, I guess we're fighting. And we'd drive down to there and we'd fight and come back. And then whatever comes up, you get as much experience as you can. Yeah. And then basically from then I was a full-time MMA athlete.
Okay. So how do you make up in your mind that you're now going to become a full-time MMA athlete? Because it's obviously a tough decision to make. Because I mean, especially a few years ago, it's tough. You know, I mean, obviously looking back now, I'm sure you wouldn't regret it, but it must have been quite a tough decision to make to walk away from you know a promising rugby career to now become an MMA athlete.
It was tough, but it wasn't tough at the same time.
Okay.
I was set up for quite a decent rugby career, but it came to a point where the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze for me anymore. Like I tell everyone, I fell out of love with rugby in terms of playing. I mean, I still love to watch, but just in terms of playing and the politics that surround a team sport. And I found myself in this position where I've put in so many years of work and sacrifice into my conditioning and my physical well-being and my mental well-being surrounded by sport. I've invested so much, and it couldn't go to waste. So I knew that I wanted to be a professional athlete, and I had guys like Andrew van Zyl that was at my school and a mentor, long-time mentor, who coached me since I was 14 years old in terms of rugby. And I was looking at what he was doing at the time. I mean, at that time, I think it was like EFC 11 when he first fought against Potts. And I went and watched that, and I was like, you know what, this is actually something I may be able to do. And it just kind of crossed my mind. At that stage, I was still well into my rugby. And like I said, I met Rich and I met Fight Fit Militia, and I fell completely in love with MMA and what it means to be an MMA athlete and everything that goes into it, the sacrifice and all the hard work that you have to put in as an individual. And I think the biggest plus for me was that it was going to be everything that I put in, I'd directly reap the benefits thereof. It was just, if I go and train and I fight and I win, then I win 5 fights in a row. That's undeniable. You know, no one can say to me, oh, I can't pick you for this team because you just didn't do this right or you didn't do that right. If you win, you win. No matter who you are, at some stage, you're going to be looked at.
Sure.
No matter what promotion you fight in. If you go out there and you lose, you have to then take ownership of what you've done, and you go look at yourself and the improvements that you have to make towards those things. You know, like if you're lacking in a certain area, you have to make sure that the next time you're better. So that was the biggest charming factor for me in terms of deciding to become an MMA athlete.
Okay. Just to go back to that, the Commonwealth Games for Sambo. So you were supposed to go to the Commonwealth Games, then something happened.
Yes.
You had a couple of nasty surprises along the way. Just talk us through that.
So we had prepped and trained for the 2014 Commonwealth Sambo tournament, which was in London. And it was literally 5 days from leaving. It was my final sparring session. I was doing my rounds with my usual partners, Chef and Merrick at the stage. And it was literally the last minute of my last round of sparring. And Merrick shot for a takedown on me. And I tried to sprawl him out. And my knee got caught. And it twisted. And it was an ACL injury. And it was my second ACL after an operation in 2008. And as soon as it happened, I knew. Like, I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. So that same day, I went to the hospital, get scans, and confirmed that, it was an ACL. So a week later, I had the surgery, and then I was on my way to recovery, and then 8 weeks later, I was in a massive car accident. So like they say, when it rains it pours.
Yeah, sure.
But those are all things that I'm better for now, having learnt everything along the way and the patience of an injury. And it made me really grateful for, I mean sitting on the side, only an athlete who's sat on the side for 9 to 12 months will understand the appreciation of what they have when they've got it, you know, when you're healthy, when you're fit, when you're strong.
Sure. When
to put in the work and how far you can push yourself, because there's no heartache and pain as undergoing a surgery and missing out on a competition like that, where you'd receive your South African colours and you get your blazer, and being on the world stage like that and being so well prepared, and once again the investment and the time you put in. Sure. And then being on your way to recovery, and then the car accident, and just all these things are stacked against you. But like I say, I mean, I'm grateful for everything that happened to me then, because I do believe I'm much stronger mentally and physically now, having come back from everything and overcome.
Yeah, that's always a question. So actually, what I wanted to ask you next was, through like a lot of fighting, if you watch, you know, you always find fighters who have had quite a, let's say, a troublesome road to get to where they are, like yourself, like something like a car accident, you know, and you have to recover and come back from that. You know, guys who've had like strange diseases and have come back from that, and always seem to be that much more mentally tougher for it, you know. So is it fair to assume that something like that, obviously having survived that physically and mentally, like you've just explained, you know, sitting on the sidelines or not missing out on competition that you've been so well prepared for, does that build a kind of mental toughness that you couldn't do anywhere else? You know, you couldn't just sit on the sidelines and or like see a mind coach and stuff like that to get that sort of mental toughness. You know, so I often wonder about that for a guy like yourself who had to go through so much like physical adversity as well as mental adversity, how that translates into a fight game, you know, kind of saying to yourself, well, look, you know, I've been to hell and back and here I am, you're not going to put me away. Is that fair enough to assume?
Of course, yeah. I mean, like you say, the physical adversity, I mean, most humans are resilient and we can endure quite a bit of pain, but I think it's the mental adversity that
Sure.
you face, sitting on the sideline and watching everyone achieve while you were so close to achieving. It makes you hungry and makes you want it in ways that you can't train. Like you say, you can't see a mental coach or a psychologist, or you can't go to talk to someone about it like just your normal coach. No one understands until they're on the sideline and they're the ones running around the mats, giving the guys water while they're sparring, and you're the one in the corner when you're supposed to be the one in the cage, and you just can't. You can't train for that, and those are life lessons that are hard learnt at the time, but like you say, it translates directly into that mental toughness and that mental fortitude when preparing for a fight, and the difficulties that come along with a fight camp and a weight cut and the adversities in a fight. You know, that those uncomfortable scenarios are now more comfortable because, I mean, you've literally been hit with what life can throw at you, but you can come back.
Sure.
You can always find it within yourself to come back.
Okay.
And that's a huge thing for me.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of like there's often like a theme through a lot of fighters' stories. You know, you often will, you know, some guys have rare diseases and strange things that happen to them along the way and come back from it. You know, I always find like it's those guys seem to have just a rare sense of calmness almost from the outside, you know, to kind of like, you know, well, there's not much you can do to me physically, so mentally I'm not really worried about what you are. So it's always a interesting question for me to kind of see for a guy like yourself who's obviously had to deal with quite a bit to get to where you are. Right, let's just have a look. Your career, you in the EFC now, you're 3-0, undefeated. Obviously you came in with a lot of hype and there's still a lot of hype around you. I think the scariest thing for most fans is that, I mean, in 3 fights you've been in the EFC for less than 10 minutes, we've seen you fight, you know. So that obviously speaks volumes to your skill and your talent, but it also doesn't allow us to see what you've got or you to showcase every corner of what you've got. So if let's say, for example, I'm a talent scout, you know, and I'm trying to find the next big fighter, you know, and you've had less than 10 minutes in 3 fights. What would you say to fans and someone like who was maybe trying to see what you've got? What else is there to see from you, you know?
I think that's the best part of for fans and those who actually follow my career, is that I haven't actually shown a tenth of what I'm capable of. I mean, I've been put in a tight spot against Kian maybe once in my second fight, but it was nothing where I actually felt that there wasn't a situation where I was going to win that fight. So I think, like you say, there's so much more to show, and I think that's part of, let's call it the Chad factor,
Sure.
or the Superman factor, where I've shown what I'm capable of, but I've also not shown what I'm capable of. And I think that's what the frustrating things it is for fans as well. It's frustrating because people want to see more, but the fight game it's a weird game, and you've got to look at it as a business.
Sure.
At the end of the day, and you got to see when guys look at it as a stock market, and when guys' stocks are high, when those guys are wanted, and you got to look whose stock is highest that you can fight, and you beat him and you make your stock higher. So you got to plan and map your career, because you get one shot at it, and a slip up here and there and you just back at the bottom of the pile again. And yeah, I think I've been smart in the way that I've gone about my fighting. I haven't picked any fights. I mean, I've been given what I've been given, I've taken, and I've accepted it, and I've just come through with shining colors, fortunately. And yeah, that's just part of what I do.
Okay. And I recently had Graham Cartmell on here, and we were discussing the outlook of the EFC and big fights to come, and kind of the landscape of what's happening. And it was part of the reason why we wanted you on the show, because he kind of left the door open for us to get your side of the story. So obviously there was quite a bit of announcing, and then fights being pulled off, fighters pulling out, one of which was yourself and Dolce. So he was obviously, it seemed he wasn't in the happiest of places about it, because I think he feels obviously the title needs to be contended, and you're the next contender. And then he said that you chose not to take that fight. So can you maybe just explain to us your reasoning for that? Because for myself, I'm obviously looking at it as this is the title holder, you're the title contender. So it's quite a strange one for me to comprehend as well. So it's a chance for you to give us a reason why you're not going to take that fight.
So I never once accepted the fight.
Okay.
Not verbally, not via text. And I think Michiel and Dolce were supposed to fight in March, if I'm not mistaken. And I got a call, I think it was 2 or 3 days before Christmas, and can you fight Dolce? Michiel is pulled out. At that stage, we weren't given the facts of why Michiel was pulled out, but I think it doesn't actually matter. The fact was that he wasn't going to be fighting, and I was obviously supposed to be next in line. I didn't accept the fight then, because I was at a stage where I'd already had sponsors pay for my trip overseas, and that at that time was my priority. That trip was booked and paid for, and my commitment to going overseas was a big one, because it was important for my career to go over there. And so that was the first installment of non-acceptance of the fight, let's call it.
The Dolce Superman saga.
Yeah.
Dolce Gate, we'll call it.
Yeah. And then there were 2 or 3 announcements where I think they just announced it, of probable upcoming fights, where they were maybe trying to hype the situations for fans. And then I had a couple of meetings along the way, and cut a long story short, basically I'm at a situation now where, as we heard earlier, I'm wanting to fight overseas.
Sure.
And not a lot of people know that at the time when, let's call it again, non-acceptance of the second or third time that I was offered the fight, I'd been offered contracts in Risen. I'd been offered contracts in Bellator, and these are big things. And I was just at a stage where everything kind of happened within those 2 weeks, 3 weeks when I was training overseas. So going over there was huge for me, because my agent had a lot of leverage to work with.
Sure.
And rubbing shoulders with the big guys and getting the better of a lot of them. They actually saw what we were capable of. Within a week coming back from that trip, being in SA, we got offered some contracts, and due to visa issues at the stage, I couldn't take the fight in Bellator. It was a last minute fight. It was in Belfast, and I just couldn't get my visa in time. But that was a 4-fight Bellator contract that was literally on the table, and it was kind of tough to decline the fight because I was in such good shape and I was ready to go. And my agent just told me to relax and be calm, and the opportunity will come again. And I'm at a stage now where my EFC contract is basically up, and I don't want to be in a situation where I fight for a belt, I become the champion, and I'm stuck as the champion for the next 8 to 12 months before another challenger arises. I am young, I'm a young fighter, and I'm a young guy, and I understand I'm still inexperienced in terms of cage time. I also don't want to be fighting against a guy that one of my teammates has already beaten. There's no credibility in that for me. My mentor and teammate Chef dismantled him within a round. So winning that fight does nothing for me, because all the haters are going to be like, well, Chef did it anyway, so who cares?
Sure.
And you go and lose that fight because it's MMA and anything can happen, and then guys are like, oh well, we told you he was going to lose at some stage anyway. And like I say, it's stocks, and Dolce's stocks aren't that high. He's a phenomenal athlete, but he's not a great fighter. If you look at the fight he put on with Tamelo, it was probably one of the most boring fights that we've ever seen. It was a 5-round yawn fest, and no disrespect to either of the athletes, but it was just a non-engaging, boring fight, and that's
Sure.
not my style.
Sure.
He dismantled Gideon, but after Gideon's fight against Chef, he was never the same athlete. So who has he actually beaten? Is he even the legitimate champ? Must I fight a champ that is not legitimate? I mean, how did he get the belt? He got the belt from Chef retiring.
Yeah.
He didn't actually beat anyone to get that belt. So in terms of, like I said, MMA is a business, and it's like a stock market. His stock's not that high at the moment. So what value is there in that fight for me? If I beat him and become EFC light heavyweight champion, what is it going to do for me? It's going to make me sit back and get a fight, maybe an international guy every 8 to 12 months. And sure, I'm not fighting currently, but I'd rather work on other aspects of things to maybe put my career forward on other platforms. And I know that I need to be fighting internationally. And like I said, as South African athletes, we need to be competing overseas, not just fighting international guys here, because it's still your comfort.
Sure.
You know, you're fighting in your comfort zone. I mean, even though Sun City, that first time, that the first event that we fought, when I fought against Kian, that was our first event at Sun City. So it had that mystic feel to it, in terms of it wasn't a comfortable situation, an uncomfortable, unfamiliar environment, which was great. And
Yeah.
that put me into the next level, you know. But
you also haven't had to deal with jet lag and time zones and
100%.
things like that, you know. I mean, you've taken a small trip down the road, so it's...
Exactly. I mean, I've driven there on the day that I'm weighing in. I've got all my buddies around me, all my teammates around me. What's going to happen when I now have to fly somewhere else in the world, and I'm cutting weight on the airplane, and I'm fighting an unknown opponent? Because at the end of the day, Dolce is a known factor to me. I mean, mentally in my head, I've already beaten him. And not to say that it would be different if we were to go out there and physically fight. I mean, it's MMA and anything can happen, and I have the utmost respect for him as an athlete, but as a fighter, there's no chance that he'd beat me. So it's a nothing fight for me, to be honest.
Okay. Because obviously, in the lovely game of MMA, there's always going to be the naysayers, you know. A lot of people will say, "Oh, you're running scared," and things like that, you know. Which is why I wanted to ask that question, to kind of just get an understanding, because anybody who knows anything will know that you're definitely not running scared. There obviously has to be some reason behind why you don't want to take that fight, and there you have it. So it's more like a career preservation kind of thing, you know, keeping your stock high, you know. So would it be fair to assume that the next time we see you fighting won't be in the EFC?
That's a difficult thing to answer directly. In my heart and in my mind, I'm hoping so, and that's what I've committed to. And it's not that I do not want to fight in the EFC.
Sure.
I love EFC, and everything that all the guys have done for me and the platform that they create for us is a great one. And it's not so much that I do not want to fight in EFC. It's the fact that I want to fight abroad. I need to fight abroad. It's more of a need than a want, because we are needing to compete on that level, and it's almost like we are needing to set right the wrongs of previous guys who've gone over there at the wrong stages of the careers that they're in. It was at the wrong time that both guys who went over to the UFC, it was the wrong times of their career.
Sure.
Had it been a couple years earlier when they were in their prime, it would be a whole different ballgame. Had it been that maybe Gareth had a few fights before he went to the big stage of the UFC internationally, maybe that would have made a bigger difference in his career.
Sure.
And he did great things for us in terms of getting that first win against Baba Bush. It was great for South African MMA. But I believe that I'm a young fighter, I'm a hybrid fighter, I'm of the new generation, and I believe that there are a few of us in the EFC that can go over there and fly the South African banner really high. The South African banner of MMA is one that will be a force to be reckoned with in the near future if we are allowed the freedom to go fight there.
Okay.
So I do hope that my next fight will be there, but there's also the question at what division. So what a lot of people don't know, that I'm currently in the process of cutting to middleweight.
Okay.
So that's something that guys don't know either. So maybe that's why I didn't want to fight Dolce.
Okay. That makes things very interesting, because now that you say that, it sparks an idea that I have in my head. Maybe you can clarify. Do you think, let's take Soldier Boy for an example, that overseas we're a little bit smaller in our weight classes? So Gareth was a little bit small for his weight class. So is that urging you on maybe to say, like, look, okay, here in the EFC as a light heavyweight you're quite a big guy, but internationally you're actually still quite small?
Yeah, I'd say, I'm probably the biggest here as a light heavyweight. But if you want to be mixing it up with the best in the world, you can't just look locally. I mean, how many South African fighters are ranked in the top 10 in the world? 0.
Yeah.
So you can't look at yourself and say, okay, I want to be the best in the world, so I've got to be the EFC champion. You've got to say, how will I become a Bellator or a UFC or a Risen champion? What are the guys over there doing? And that's a huge part of why Rich makes us travel, is so that he can expose us to what's really out there, and it really puts things into perspective for us, you know. Like, I went over there and I was comfortable training against all the middleweights and light heavyweights and even heavyweights, but training and fighting is different, you know. I can train with guys that are lightweights here in the gym and they're comfortable training against me, but you put them up against a guy that's a bit bigger than them in a fight, and it's a different story.
Sure.
So like you say, yes, maybe Gareth was a bit small for the caliber of guys that he was fighting against. We could maybe have seen that in his last fight.
Sure.
I mean, that guy was a beast. He was
monster.
lean, he was ripped, he was explosive, he was athletic, and that's the new generation of fighters that's coming through. I mean, that guy's a young prospect in his career.
Well, that, however you say his name, Bocancino or whatever,
Yeah.
I see in his next fight, he's on the main card already.
Exactly.
So he's gone straight from early prelim straight to the main card, you know. So that also speaks to the caliber of kind of guy that he is. But it was that exact fight that led me down that chain of thought. And I kind of said to myself, but hang on, are we missing a trick? Are our weight class is something different? Because if you look at like the amateur scene, for example, it always seems to be one weight class below. You know what I mean? So a guy who competes at lightweight as an amateur is going to compete as a featherweight as a professional.
Correct. Yes.
And I kind of feel like maybe that's the same scenario for us going across overseas, that we're a little bit smaller than what we should be, you know. Look, obviously smaller is such a weird thing to say in MMA, because there's such like a varied body types in fight styles, you know. You get a longer guy, you get a shorter guy, you get a more athletic kind of built guy, so it's hard to say smaller in that sense.
Yes,
but I feel generally for like power to weight ratio kind of thing, we seem to be, well, not that we can say, but from what we've seen, perhaps we're falling short. So if a guy like yourself is able to cut down to middleweight, for me it makes perfect sense. It's a perfect scenario, you know what I mean? Because I think at middleweight here, it's going to be a hell of a story, you know what I mean? And middleweight overseas, you're going to become a massive contender because you've got that power. You're going to be leveled up on power and stuff like that. So it's very interesting for me.
So that was the first time that anyone actually heard, apart from the guys at the gym.
There you have it.
So it was cool to be able to do it over here, and
cool, man. Appreciate that.
Kind of let that little secret out. So that's the process that we're in now, and that's the stage where I'm at.
Okay.
So.
And it's obviously backed by the mad scientist Rory Diesel behind the scene.
Of course. I can't do anything without Rory now. Whatever Rich says goes, and whatever Rory does and says I must do, I'll do. So
sure.
It's been a tough 3 weeks, but the weight's coming down nicely, and I've retained all the muscle that I've wanted to, and we're basically exactly where we need to be. So I'll be doing a test cut now in the next few weeks in the gym.
I was just going to say, are you guys getting ready for that test cut? No.
So it's been basically 2.5 weeks in, and it's going well. We got about 3-4 weeks to go before I do that cut. I know the cut's going to be tough, but you know, after being overseas and seeing what the guys do, and I actually made quite a few friends overseas. Like, I mean, I made good friends with a guy like Rashad Evans and Linton Vasel, and I chat to Linton often, and it's just, as light heavies, the guys are cutting from about 105 lean, whereas here I don't think there's any light heavy apart from Chef maybe that was cutting from that sort of weight and putting that sort of weight on the next day.
Sure.
And I think, like you say, I'd be a massive middleweight here, and going overseas and going forward, it would also hold me in good stead to compete with the guys over there, because even there I'd be one of the bigger guys. So I'm excited for this. We're on track.
Sure. Just a thought came across my mind to kind of think at the pinnacle of the light heavyweight division, like a guy like Daniel Cormier or Anthony Johnson. I mean, these are some big lads. I mean, Daniel Cormier is not the tallest of guys. I think he's like 5'10" or something like that.
I'm a lot taller than him. I actually met him in Vancouver. So,
but the guys are cutting down. So what would you generally walk around at?
So I'd walk around at about 100.
Okay.
Maybe just under, which is perfect cutting weight if you're an overseas middleweight.
Yeah, sure.
At Combat Club, we trained with and against Rumble. So the first time I saw him walk into the gym, we were warming up, and I was like,
I'm cutting to middleweight.
It wasn't quite that case. I was like, okay, cool. Well, he's a bit out of shape. And he's fat, and he can't move like I can. And even having like seen his power and his movements and stuff, it wasn't that I was overwhelmed at all. I just think it would be a very, very good career move for me going forward internationally and locally if I am able to make that weight and operate in that weight class. I think if I get comfortable doing that, I think it would be a really, really good thing for my future.
Yeah, man. Sounds like a great idea to me. I'm all for it.
It's just who are they going to give me to fight?
I have some suspicions. Anyway.
Do tell.
We'll discuss that later. Cool, man, Chad. Just to wind it up, the last thing. Obviously, I mean, you're one of the rare cases in MMA in South Africa that's, you know, become like this massive marketable brand. You've got massive good sponsors behind you. You've got a career in front of you that's evidently about to kick off, or that's the way we see it. So, just passing down the knowledge down the line, what advice would you give to younger guys? I mean, obviously besides the normal training stuff, but, you know, to make yourself marketable and to be the best athlete you could possibly be. Obviously, being a professional MMA athlete in South Africa is tough. You know, it's tough to cut it, and it's tough to get the kind of sponsors that will allow you to be a full-time athlete. And I think a lot of guys get it wrong, you know. So I think someone like yourself is in a good position to hand out a bit of advice for the younger guys coming through there.
Thank you. Education.
Sure.
Education is one of the most important things. Getting your degree or something to study and getting that kind of backing behind you, because you learn a lot from that. So if you're an educated guy, then people are much more willing to talk to you. You're much more approachable, and you're much more presentable. Secondly, I think that you need to become your own brand. I think before any of these brands associated with me, when I was still an amateur, I had my own thing going on. I had the whole Superman vibe going, and I was unique. So it's all about uniqueness in this game. Everyone's got their own persona and stigma, and everyone comes as a different package, and I think that's the selling point. That's the selling point when it comes to a fight. That's the selling point when it comes to attracting sponsors, and that's a big thing to create a fan base and a following, which is super important, you know. So I think being unique, and I think everyone now is trying to jump on the Conor McGregor train, and there's a reason why there's only one Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
He's unique in what he does, the way he speaks, the way he talks, and the way he acts is just, he's one of a kind. There's not going to be another Conor McGregor. He is, he's our Floyd Mayweather of MMA, you know. So there's not going to be another one. So everyone needs to stop trying to be Conor McGregor. The most successful thing you can do is to be yourself and to become educated and just know how to sell yourself, know what your strengths are, know what your selling points are, and just back yourself 100% with those things.
Yeah, 100%, man, and I think that's some solid advice. Well, that's some exciting stuff you've given us, man, and we really look forward to see what comes out of Superman in the future. And yeah, man, it's exciting times, and we, again, just thank you very much for your time, and we wish you all the best, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, and we're out. Ciao.